We always have to start with our safe harbor slide, which is where we just say, hey, if we mention anything about future capabilities coming up in the platform, the timing and or even the capability itself are not a promise that they will actually happen. And I also like to take this time to remind everybody that this session obviously is being recorded. And so to be careful to make sure that you don't, put any company confidential information out here. So like I said, we're going to be talking about care and feeding of your instances today. Some of this will be beginner and intermediate and a little bit of advanced topics here. So hopefully we have a little bit of something for everybody. We'll start out with introducing our presenters today. Then we'll talk specifically about instance management and best practices around that before we move into talking about table management. And last but not least, data and code management and a little bit of governance thrown in there as well. We just want to take a moment to level set on the goal of the webinar. We're assuming that you're a ServiceNow professional who is attending this because you want to make sure that your instances are optimized and that you understand without regular care and feeding of these instances, they'll start to grow and potentially become slow in performance or potentially unstable, and that you need a practice or a plan to manage those going forward. So that's what we're going to try to provide for you today. So we'll get into introductions for anybody who hasn't been on these webinars before. My name is Brita Koch. I have been with ServiceNow for a little over 15 years, and I spent about 10 years out in the field as an engagement manager, working with customers and partners like yourselves implementing ServiceNow. So I feel like I have a good window into some of the pain that you feel out there sometimes. And then right now I'm working on the community where I'm hosting these events. I'm also working to make our community content compelling and helpful for you. Ishaan, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Beta. Thank you everyone for joining us. Good morning, good evening, good night from wherever in the world you're joining us. And myself, Ishaan, I am a manager solution architect currently working with EY, and I'm also a 4 times ServiceNow MVP and a certified technical architect. I've been in the ServiceNow space for about 8 years now. And yeah, do live streams, with other MVPs and peers. Also used to organize Melbourne meetups when I was in Australia, and yeah, contribute to the community wherever I can, and that's why we are here today. So that's about me. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adefisayo. I've been working on ServiceNow also for around 8 years now. I started with mostly incident and then went on to do ITOM and ITAM. I try to provide consulting services for companies, bringing in my experience working in different industry from the finance to the telecom. I've had different clients in different sector. And I'm happy to be here to discuss on this topic with everyone.
Thank you. So as you can see, I've got a brilliant panel here that is going to be able to help you. I do love me a poll because we kind of like to see where the audience is sitting and where you're feeling. So if you want to go ahead and answer this, do you have a regular cadence for maintaining your instances? And I see right out of the gate, we've got someone who's like, yes, we review those before upgrades. Yes. And we're looking here to optimize. We have some no's in the house. So hopefully we can help you all out. And some of you have a cadence, but don't feel like it's super great. So you're looking for some additional help there. So kind of all over the board here, but most everybody at least is reviewing them before upgrades. So that's awesome. I'm going to end the poll here. Thanks for the participation there. We got just about everybody participating in the poll. And without any further ado from me, I am going to turn it over to Ishaan.
All right. Thank you, Beta. Beta, do you want me to take over the screen, or we good here?
I can do it.
Okay. So now, if you looked at the agenda, we're primarily looking at 3 things here. So one being instance management, the second one being table management, and third one being data management. It's all because the session is all about what we are putting into our instance and what can be the consequences and what needs to be looked at, what needs to be maintained. And that this is where the first item is coming up, which is instance management. So what we are in next couple of slides, what we'll see is how we can manage the performance of our instance, make sure that our instance is easily upgradable, it's sustainable for future, future proof for solutions, and it's at peak performance. So what happens is, let's say if we are dealing with, giving an example of one of our customers where they had a case table, and they had like millions of records in there. So the instance, when we try to open records on that table, it's gets slow. There's a performance impact that happens. So how all of that can be managed. So now moving on to the next slide, there are few things that in terms of cadence that we will look at. We have some day-to-day activities that we can do for having the instance health at its peak. The first one being, managing the daily logs, reviewing the what's happening. Are there too many errors getting created, right? And reviewing if there are any slow transactions. So sometimes what happens is we create some script or a particular business rule which is, queuing up, is making the instance slow, and it's taking a longer time to execute. So we need to make sure on a daily basis that we are reviewing our slow transactions. We are reviewing that there are not long running scripts in the system, uh, and making sure that the flows are not queuing up, the workflows are not queuing up, they're getting processed as soon as they are completed. Because if they start to queue up over the period of time, there'll be like thousands of records. Again, I've seen this at one of our clients where there are like 20,000 flows stuck in a queued state in their prod environment. And like, again, because the triggers of those flows were not correct, and they had long queries in those flows as well. So we need to make sure that we are monitoring all of these on a daily basis. And if we move on to the next slide. Wait. Oh,
All
sorry.
right.
Not
Yeah,
not the next slide. Sorry, weekly. Yeah. So yeah. So in terms of a weekly one, what we can do is we can monitor if all the scheduled jobs in the systems are getting executed as planned. If there's anything wrong going on with those scheduled jobs, are there any errors identified in the logs or warnings that are coming up? So we should take them seriously and look at them on a weekly basis. So, and also look at excessively large log files. If they are getting created in the system, have them remediated, have them removed. So if you look at the logs, usually like what I've seen is they go up to 7 days, because just there are so many records created. They are cleaned up after a 7 day period. So if there are anything being logged in excess, or we need to get those cleaned up as well. And again, this will be a repeat from a daily, which is looking at long running jobs or slow running jobs. Now, those are the things that we can do weekly. In terms of a monthly things, what we can look is we can check how a particular table is growing. I was just giving an example of a particular case table. Now, case is something, let's say if a company is having a customer service management and there are multiple, thousands of customers, they're coming back to uh, that particular organization, creating cases, and then they are not, again, we will go down this all of this in the detail in table management, but we are not archiving it, we are not excluding it from the particular case table. It will have performance impact. So we need to track the table growth, ensure that they don't get too large, and also make sure that we have got remediation, like we are having table management in place to overcome this problem early on. Now, removing also on a monthly basis, what we can do is we can remove data that is not required. So many times there is data that is just created in the system and it's not needed anymore. So something that we can also do is cleaning up those records rather than just letting them sit in the system doing nothing. So maybe it can be a particular foundation data, like locations that are not used, to we clean up those locations. And again, this is a repeat from daily and weekly. Is we are still reviewing, change in the slow queries, long running jobs. So if everything is going right, and in terms of a quarterly, what we can do is ServiceNow has got few things in place. I'm not sure if you've seen, but instance scan and health scan. So we have got a lot of those available out of the box, and there is also like one of our other MVPs, Mark. He has also created a repository of instance scans. I think that's on GitHub. He's posted it for free, and we can have those in place, which will basically, we can run those instance scans and check if there's a, best practices that has not been followed. Let's say, if there is some something that should not be there in the script, right? Monitoring all those, running all those scans on a quarterly basis, reviewing the upgrade history. Like the service now is releasing upgrades every 6 months, and uh, it's good to be up to the latest upgrade to have all the latest features and be future proof. So looking at the upgrade history, if you have upgraded in the last quarter, looking at the skipped updates, what has been missed, what is in the system, and also checking, while we are doing this, also checking the code quality. And code quality is something that we can also monitor as we are developing as part of sprint peer reviews. But yeah, something like again, not a very good example. So one of our clients, they were working on uh, on a particular dev instance, and they created a query rule on, they modified the query business rule on incident table, which worked fine in dev, which worked fine in all the testing, which, but when once it was moved to prod, the prod instance went down for about 2 hours, just
Mm.
because it was running in a like a loop. And I've not seen that. That's like only one instance I've seen. But to avoid all that, it's always good to check the code. Test is performance, test is properly with all the data. So those are the things that we have. Any questions that we have here? Okay.
Not yet.
Okay. So now moving on. While we have spoken about the what activities, what we can do on a daily, weekly, quarterly, and monthly basis, we something that I recommend to all my customers, and at the places I work at, is having a clone every 3 months. I've seen people, clients not taking this seriously and not doing system clones over a quarter. Now, how it impacts is the sync bit. Sometimes the sync between the instances just breaks. There are things that are completely different in dev and test, and then the prod environment. Or let's say if it's a 4 instance stack, also the QA environment pre-prod. So it's best to have the environments in sync. We plan the have a schedule for your system cloning, have a profile attached to it. So uh, clone it. So let's say you don't have to clone everything to the non-prod environment. Let's say there is some PII data that needs, like employee IDs or some things that's confidential that should only stay in prod. We can have them excluded from. We can have those tables excluded from the clone, and have the clone planned, have a calendar, like yearly calendar of when the clone will take place for every non-prod environment, and have those in sync. So how that will work is, we'll be up to date with this thing once we are developing, but we know the environments are not that out of sync. And once we do the deployment, it will help us as well, because we'll not get a lot of errors in there. So those are a few policies that we can also look at in terms of cloning. If we can move on to the next slide. So now talking about the production instance consolidation. So while we are doing cloning, we also need to make sure that the every instance has its own purpose. Uh, it's not like we are just doing everything on the development environment, everything on if there's a issue or a UAT defect that comes up, we are going and fixing that on the test environment. So we need to define a set purpose for every uh, environment, and that is the same thing that we have on the screen is having development for the development environment, doing the system integration testing on the test environment, and user acceptance testing on the QA environment. And then like if it depends how what the stack you have, or it can be 4 instance, 3 instance, or sometimes even 2, depends on customer to customer, but need to have that segregated. And if you move on to the next one, Rita.
Sure thing. Oops.
So now this is something in terms of instance release strategy. So I know that more than 90% people still use update sets, and it's most used, even though other functionalities are available. Even I prefer using update sets, but ServiceNow recommends to use ServiceNow's app repo to push the updates. So let's say if you have a 4 instance stack, dev, test, UAT, and production. So again, we have if you look at the bottom, we have the clone. So we do a quarterly clone for dev, test, UAT, and like once we are moving the code, if we prefer, the approach would be using app repo and installing those applications on the higher instances as we develop. And if there's any defect or anything comes in, it again goes in through the dev instance rather than making changes on the test. And just in case if it's not available, we always have the backup of moving the update set as well. So that is the instance release strategy approach that I'd recommend. So if we move on to the next one. Now coming back to system clone consideration guidance. So again, have the system clones in place, keep everyone informed so that the project team or the people working on the dev environment are able to take the backup of their work. And frequency can be uh, do through individual requirements, but again, I would say 3 months is good enough. Every quarter, if we do a clone, the platforms will be in sync. And yeah, that's about it.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to another poll here to give Ishaan a moment to rest his voice. So just curious, what you feel your expertise is to perform performance maintenance, and how are you learning things so far? Yeah, it looks like more training is needed. Yeah, and I think while you're doing the poll, it's easy. I wanted to kind of go back to that instance cloning. It's easy for instances to get out of sync without us even really realizing it. And we have this thing in our brain that it's not. It's kind of like when I used to work with people with discovery, and they try to tell me their spreadsheets were up to date, and I'd be like, yeah, I don't think so. Anywho, I digress. So it looks like a lot of people would like more training, but have some level of confidence. And then some people are on a more advanced level, which is great. I'm glad to hear that. And I will end the poll. And then we're going to pick up on our next topic, which is table management.
Yeah. Okay, so coming on to table management, and Sayo, please feel free to jump in as well here if you
Yeah.
want. So yeah, we will be looking at a few things how we can manage tables. I was just speaking about an example where we had like a million records in the case table, and whenever we used to open that list of maybe a report on that table or a dashboard, it took maybe I'll not say a minute, maybe 30 seconds to load that list just because of the number of records. So few things, again, I will not read the complete slide, but few things that we can do here is we can rotate the tables, right? Break the table into multiple tables called shards, and each table has a specific time frame. We can have that uh, in place for a certain amount of time, and basically uh, it how this will help is it will address the query and performance and also with the data retention. Now, when to use it is only when there's a large quantity of records. Not it's not like if the particular table is having 1,000 records, we are applying this. So coming back to the takeaway that we had from instance management is, uh, you know, we we basically uh, break the tables where we have large quantities of data. Not like we're not going and for all the tables here. So yeah, I'm moving on.
Anything else,
Mm,
Vaseo, you want to lean in on this?
yeah.
Yeah, table rotation is very important when you have the need to make sure you optimize performance. So with that, by splitting those tables into shard, you're able to make sure that the time it takes to query information and whatnot, it's best managed. And then with that idea and rotation, then it's easier for us to get data from the table. So it's a good strategy to have table rotation in place when you have tables that have high volume of data coming in.
Right.
Yes.
We did have a question come in the chat, but I want to hold that till later, if you don't mind there, Ujwal. Oh yeah, sorry, interrupted. So we can move on to table extension. If there's anything else you want to go over this.
Yeah, table extension is also exactly what we have with table rotation, but the difference here is for extension, you're still retaining data. When you go through the shard, you're not in any way deleting data. So data is not overwritten and data is kept for a time period. For example, if you have a growing number of incidents, you can use table rotation possibly to manage that. I've seen clients with 1 million, 2 million plus record of incidents. So we can apply the same logic here for managing those data, but then we just break it into shard. But when we rotate the tables, we're not flushing our data, but after the shards rotate, then we keep that information in the system. So the option of whether to do table rotation or table extension depends on the use case you have. Most likely, for example, if you're looking at logs, that's after a while they're not relevant, or you don't have any regulatory requirement for that, you could easily use table rotation for that. And then for extension, if you need to still keep the data, that can be a use case for table extension.
And then I think we got a few do's and don'ts here that kind of help flesh out those use cases that Vaseo was just referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, again, coming back, again, I haven't answered that question. That's still open. So monitoring the table growth, where there is high quality of data, we apply rotation and the extension. So, and some places where we don't apply this are the CMDB, sysaudit delete, those sort of table that they are already a mechanism in place where they are taken away after the 7 days, and as and when they are created. Some place where there is high level of records being created, and that so we can use this table rotation and table extension there. And again, as you can see on the slides as well, extension is to keep the, and as Fizai also mentioned, the extension is to keep the data indefinitely, and rotation is to keep a relatively small amount of data and then delete it, so over time. So
And
and
feel free to push back on your organization because they like to save a lot of data sometimes that they don't need to. So we talk about that, I think, a little bit in the governance too.
yeah, that can be a topic in itself.
Yeah.
Right. And then we have got a table cleaner as well in ServiceNow. So data grows over time as data grows over time, and basically once we uh, archive it we move it, and the table cleaner basically removes the old data. So, and Peter, if you move to the next slide, we have got this in detail. So again, some do's and don'ts about the table cleaner is, we use it on large volume of data. Something that we'd not do is try not to use it with the rotation and the extension configured. And I think we had the same question in there. Use an indexed column to match field or any conditions for the table cleaner if you want to clean the table. And you know, a single run to remove large volumes can, co- uh, cause issues. So better to run them in batches.
Yeah, and it's important to also understand your compliance requirements. So if you're applying to apply table cleaner and you have some regulatory compliance in terms of to enforce maybe data retention, you have to put that in mind, because table cleaner is going to look at the age of your record in terms of how it's deleting those record in your instance.
100%. And it helps keep you in compliance so that you're not deleting data before you should, and you're not keeping it too long.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this one we have already covered in system cloning and instance management. But primarily what we are talking about here is like what happens when we do a particular clone. So let's say I was just mentioning that if we have any PII data and sort of employee IDs or some data that we don't want non-production environment to have access, because quite a few people can have admin access on those environments. So there are data preservers. We can also exclude those tables, or we can use cleanup scripts to have that data removed from the particular instance on the non-prod environment.
Right, and before we move on to our next section on data code
Question.
management, yeah, Martina has her hand up, so I'm gonna take you off mute if you want to ask your question. Martina?
Hey, Martina.
All right, maybe she put her hand up by accident. She's not.
Yeah. Sweet. Are we taking questions? From the chat.
Yes, does a table cleaner only run active tables or archive tables as well?
So the first one I can see is from Ujjwal. What is the viewpoint on improving search results? So yes, Ujjwal, we should definitely do that. But the purpose of having these table cleaners, table rotation, and table extension and indexing are two different things. So if we can have indexing in place, but still if there's a large amount of data, that can cause slowness while we load that data. So indexing does improve the speed and efficiency of search queries, but the idea is to archive old data so that the performance of the instance remains intact.
And I think
Yeah.
you also, oh, sorry if you say it, but you also need to be mindful of which tables you index, correct? You don't want to
Yeah,
do them.
exactly. Yeah, tables you query every day. For example, the
Incident,
incident
something related to
table,
task table. Yeah.
task table, child tables of task table. Those are tables that you query on a daily basis. So those are great ones for indexing to improve performance. But as Ishaan said, the overall objective is not just to index, but to see if you still need to keep some information in that table, or for example, you need to archive it, or you need to rotate the data inside of the table.
All right, and then the question about table rotation that Kristen had, Ujjwal answered that.
Yes, it does have table rotation out of the box.
Yeah.
And I think Ujjwal has already answered the question. Like, you can go to this list. Yeah.
All right, well, we'll move on to data and code management then, Paseo.
Yeah, just in line with what Ishan has been saying, there's some consideration we should think about in terms of data governance. The first thing we need to remember is that your ServiceNow instance is not a data warehouse, so you're not just going to bring in things that you just want, but rather it's supposed to drive business value. And so for that, the first priority should be who owns this data and why should it be in the instance in the first place? So if you start this way, then it helps you even to put a governance in place in terms of how you're onboarding data into the service now. So it's important to start with ownership because somebody has to be responsible for managing the life cycle of the data. People just want to have everything in the ServiceNow instance, but that's not actually what it's meant for. It's supposed to connect to a business value, for example, support overall business objective, and not just like another data warehouse where you're just storing information. So once information needs to come in into your instance, then you need to guard that by asking who is responsible or who owns this data accordingly. Yeah, and that is where data management comes in. So it means that you need to perform some form of audit, assessment, and then overall manage the entire life cycle of what is coming into your ServiceNow instance. Once you have this in place, this helps you even when you take up onboarding a new, for example, a new CI class or a new data into your CMDB, because you already have this mindset that first of all, you identify the ownership, then you're already looking at, for example, overall data management in the instance. And yeah, also you have to have some form of architecture for your data. For example, organizational data. Some companies have like a flat structure. How do you want to store that in the system? You should have an idea. For example, you want to bring in a custom table. Should you extend it from an already existing table? Is there a need to actually have a custom table? Do you have a table that can suffice for the purpose of what you want to store? So these are the questions you need to also ask yourself and put a structure in place in terms of governance. And then at the end, you also have to have some security policies in place. Who can access this data? What are the ACL control rules? Should I be part of a specific group to be able to access this data? And then in terms of the data itself coming in, what form of conformance and security you want to put in place so that you're not bringing in, for example, if you're managing private data of a user, how do you want to make sure that is compliant, for example, maybe with GDPR or any other regulatory compliance that you have as an organization that you need to oblige to. So these are some of the governance you need to put in place and think about. And this overall help you in terms of what is coming into your ServiceNow instance, and then help you to manage the data when they come in into the instance. So leading, yeah, okay, Nisha.
Yeah. So just like we have been talking about data governance. Now, this slide is primarily talking about how we can achieve that governance is these four leading values. So these are ServiceNow leading data practices. Again, Sayo, if you want to take over. Yeah.
Always on the screen. I can't see the slide.
Oh, okay, no worries.
Yeah, you can continue.
Yeah. So leading data practices, we have got four leading data practice. Oh,
Apologize. I accidentally.
Oh.
What happened here? There we go.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, so leading in terms of the leading data practices is we only import necessary data. A lot of times, let's say if we are doing a new ServiceNow implementation, the customers, they ask us, okay, so can I have like 5 lakh records from Remedy, move to ServiceNow, and now that I'm moving to ServiceNow. So the answer should be no, right? Like we should limit the number of records that we are importing. Let's say maybe last active tickets from last 6 months, or active tickets or inactive tickets from last 6 months. We don't need a whole lot of data to come into the system, sit there, because many times if we are importing historical data, I'm just giving example of a historical data right now. So historical data, we might have to, do some smarts to import that as well, all of it. in ServiceNow. We don't want to create another system that they are already having. So, we can store that data in our particular data lake for reference if they want to look at it again. Maybe we just import 6 months or maybe a year's data in the system, bring in only the active tickets and transform that in ServiceNow tables. So that is where the necessary data is coming from. So, and authoritative systems. Now, there can be a number of systems, right? Let's say we were want to populate the CMDB. So we are bringing in data from Discovery, we're bringing data from CrowdStrike, we're bringing from Dynatrace, SolarWinds. Like we should only bring it from the source that we trust the most, right? Let's say for bringing in desktop, SCCM or Jamf can be one of the data sources that we are using. So it's not like we are bringing in an Excel sheet and someone is just uploading it to have the laptops in the CMDB. So it should be authoritative. So we should define the data authoritative data source and get data from that source itself. And op- so again, while we are doing the data import, so the other practice is we automate this. So if we, let's say if we are populating CMDB, just not using any automation, not using any discovery or like automated import, the data will become stale. So we need to automate this so that it gets updated overnight, weekly, or monthly. It can be defined, but we have that automation in place. Automation schedules runs, and we have that data up to date in CMDB as and when required. All the relationships are in place. Everything looks good every time. And now we can have data in place, right? But we need to know who is the owner of our data. Let's say if I'm getting 5,000 shared mailboxes in mailbox class in CMDB, but I don't know who is supposed to take care of that. Who is looking at that? Who is managing that table? So I need to have maybe uh, exchange team manager or is the owner of that class. So we need to define the data owners so that they can take ownership of their data before we are bringing data into the system. So these are some leading data practices. Again, Sayo, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah. In addition to having an authoritative source for data, for example, if you're having multi-source system bringing in data, for example, let's say you're using ServiceNow Discovery, another third-party tool, we have the CMDB 360 that can help you then define the precedence of which data source should update what attributes and which one are you relying on for specific data. For example, if you're bringing in your server, you can say, for example, you want precedence from ServiceNow Discovery for maybe the memory size and the serial number, but then you can take precedence from another source system for additional attributes. So it's important to understand which is your source of truth, and if you have multiple systems bringing in information, and then you can align it in that direction. And so this boils down to overall understanding your business retention requirements. Various organizations have various requirements. For example, I worked in a gaming company, and during the time there, the requirements were completely different in terms of what they can store, how long they can store those data, and which way those data can be processed in the system. So it's important you then understand what is your overall requirement, maybe a financial institution, a gaming company, a highly regulated industry. These guidelines will then help you in how you manage your data in this instance accordingly.
Yeah, and I just want to insert here that, this is where I was talking about making sure you know your retention policy and not saving things just for saving them, because to Faseo's point, if your company gets into a lawsuit, like my previous company, it was a pharmaceutical company, so we got sued a lot. They're always doing discovery. And if you haven't cleaned out that old data, it's discoverable, and you're actually potentially putting your company at risk by keeping that data. Whereas a lot of people think, oh, we shouldn't throw anything away. But this is where you should really understand what your data retention schedule is to protect your company.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so generally some do's and don'ts, which you've seen before. So basically, it's important that we retain record in the way we actually align with our organizational objective. We should make sure that we index and make sure search is optimized. And then in cases where things we should avoid, for example, keeping record in a single location or a single storage medium, those are some of the things we should avoid when we try to retain data accordingly. Basically, the objective is that your instance is being driven by business value and whatever regulatory requirements you have, and that should then drive your strategy on how you're keeping data in your ServiceNow instance. You should not just keep it for wishful list or just because you want to have it there, but you're making sure that that is able to support maybe, for example, audit purposes and some regulatory requirements in the industry that you operate.
Right, I'm trying to get to the next slide here, Sayo.
Okay, yeah, so out of the box, ServiceNow has a lot of tools that can help you. For example, like Ishaan mentioned, we have archiving, which we can use to offload data. One of the growing data that we have is the tasks table for most organizations. You have a lot of incidents and whatnot created. So you can look at an archiving strategy of how you can offload some of the data from your primary table and have it in the archive table. We also have the CMDB data manager, which most organizations use also. For example, you have policies you create in place on how you're retaining the CI, the deletion strategy. Are you deleting both the primary and corresponding child record? And then how do you do this in your organization? So for example, I had a client where for every specific period, if the CI is not being discovered, then it kicks off a process where they look at creating a task, and then somebody has to respond to that. Otherwise, then the CI is being retired, and then you need like they had a request form that then once you kick that in, then the CI is being discovered again and whatnot. So you can use data manager in this and you can have a schedule in your organization also to manage this. And then also things like logs and others that you want to manage. You can also have a policy. Logs usually grows very fast in most organizations. And so it's important that you manage these logs and then you review them, as Ishaan said earlier, so that they don't grow and become a bottleneck to the performance of your specific ServiceNow instance. We also have other things like attachments that might be considerable of how you want to clean those up. And so it's important that you have these things in mind to make sure that they don't become a bottleneck to your ServiceNow instance performance.
100%.
Okay, so operationalize your CMDB. It's just in line with what we've been saying. The first thing is to understand that you want to bring in information, but then how do you do it in a more organized way? So, for example, you're moving from a legacy system to a new ServiceNow instance. Maybe there might be need to have data in Excel sheets where you then transform and then you load one off. But subsequently, you need to think about putting in place IRE rules so that you don't have duplicate record being created and represented in your CMDB. So it's important that once you see a growing number of, for example, duplicate record, you need to sit down and look at your IRE rules and then look at whether they are helping you trap the use cases of duplicate information coming in and then helping you uniquely identify the CIs you have in the CMDB. One thing there is also the data source precedence, which we talked about. So if you have multiple discovery source coming in, for example, you're using these different tools, including ServiceNow out of the box, then you should understand how you place those precedents. And then you also maintain the health of your database, so configure your health data preferences, look at the three KPIs, compliance, completeness, and correctness, and use that overall to drive the health of your CMDB database. It's important you don't do this as a one batch thing that happens maybe once every 6 months, but you build it as a continuous habit to make sure that the culture in the organization to maintaining the health of the CMDB is also in place. And then we have auditing regularly. So we use data certification task to create tasks for different teams that own CIs in the system. And that way we can also have shared responsibility between just you as the CMDB owner of the CMDB and then the users that owns different CI in the system. So having a cadence in terms of how you do data certification tasks, probably you do every quarterly or every monthly, depending on the organizational growth of CIs. But usually most companies adopt a quarterly basis. And so you have a large volume of CIs you need to then review at a time. And then it's important also we relate the CIs to services. As I said earlier, the CI should not exist in the system if it's not driving a business value. Overall, a bank is offering a credit debit transaction, and that is being managed or underground being enabled by a CI, maybe a server or a database. And so if a CI is not driving a specific service or just on its own in isolation, then it's important you need to look at that. So coming up with service mapping and making sure that all your CIs relate to corresponding, be it a product you call it, or a service offering, or a technical service offering. The CI must drive value because that's the way it enables the business or product you offer in the organization. Yeah, so we have archiving, the do's and don'ts. So it's important that you archive, but then it's important also that you review. So review all the tables and related tables that you want to archive. Make sure your archiving strategy doesn't conflict with your overall business objective. So that, for example, if auditors come in regularly and they ask for 2 years data, you want to quickly produce that. So you don't then archive in a manner that you have to then query your archive data and then query your real-time production data. So you can set your strategy to make sure it aligns with your organizational objective. And that way you're archiving what is what should offload from your primary table and not necessarily archiving because you had the buzzword archive. So it should align with your organizational strategy. And so you archive things that are also growing in volume. For example, CIS audits, and it's something that grows regularly. If there's need, for example, to keep those audits or logs for a specific period, then your strategy also should align with how you're doing this archiving purpose. Yeah, we also mentioned large attachments cleanup. So most times, for example, incidents, you might need to attach different maybe sheets or data to that incident record or any other thing you can look at. For example, even if you're creating a request, you might need to attach proof of some documents. These things can easily grow very fast. And so it's important you also look at those large attachments and then see how you can manage this attachment. You can easily query your CIS attachment table to identify large attachments, and then look at the size in bytes and identify how best you can manage this data in your instance. So this is something that you need to pay attention to, depending also on your organization. Like, for example, in the financial industry, there are a lot of attachment that goes into some of the day-to-day processes like incident, change, and whatnot. You need to then pay attention and look at these. As the writing says, the ServiceNow is not a content management system, so we're not just going to keep this information still in the system. Yeah, so we have two main topic tables also that we need to look at. We have the CIS audit table, we have the CIS log table. The audit table, yeah, it can be tempting that you really want to audit and have a complete history of every little change you've made on every system, on every table. But then the resulting thing is that we're just assuming that everything needs to be audited at all times. And so the CIS log just keeps on growing. So it is important to have a cleanup strategy for that. For example, table rotation that Ishaan mentioned. It's an applicable use case that can be used. You can also have a table cleanup rules set up. And then you can also look at archiving if you really need to keep those audits in place for some requirements. So the best practices should be that your retention policies should be clear, and then you make sure that you schedule and monitor these CIS audits so that you can have a better way of cleaning up and managing the record in there. Same thing applies to syslog. So also you need to also have a strategy in place for cleaning up your syslog because this is also another table that keeps growing. The essence of the syslog table is to store messages, errors, and warnings. So the growth can be very rapid, especially where the instance has a high activity or frequent errors. So it's important that you look at a large syslog table that can slow down queries and impact overall performance of your system, and then apply the same principle, whether you're doing some retention policy or you're actually having some way of incremental deletion, or probably you're looking at table rotation as the best choice to help you in this case. But most times, syslog can be something that you can have a rotation policy and then you delete at some point in time. Yeah, so we have different tools out of the box in ServiceNow for tasks. For example, as I said, that's one big table that is a child of many tables, child of incidents, of change and whatnot. So it's important that you look at the task table because it can really grow. Having a primary table with, say, 5-6 million record might not help your query to be effective. So it's important to look at how you can archive this table, have a strategy that will also align with your audit requirements and any regulatory compliance. And that way your primary table just needs to hold what you need on a daily basis, and the archive table can have historical task record. We also have email retention, so you can have a specific period when you want to have this emails kept. And then you use the CMDB data manager to manage all of the things inside the CMDB, help you to manage the health of the database, and keep in compliance with the 3 KPIs of the completeness, correctness, and correctness and completeness. And then you also have table rotation, which you can use to manage your log. So these are some of the things you can do to constantly make sure your database has what you actually need to support business, and not necessarily the technical details as some companies may have. So it's important you have all of your task record, but then you don't need to have everything in your primary table. Okay, so we also have code management, different companies and different developers and developing style. But it's important that we align with best practice in terms of how we are scripting and developing. So one key point, for example, is we try to avoid synchronous glide calls and optimize scripts, so that way you don't have so much performance on your system. Usually synchronized glide calls block server-side processing until database operation is complete. So it is better we use asynchronous glide calls whenever it's possible. We also need to optimize our database queries. And so we make sure that those we're not fetching record than we need. And then we can minimize server-side processing. This is one thing that some companies probably have problem with. Server-side scripting, when you have so many business rules that is global, for example, these things affect overall performance of your instance. So it's important that you review these and have some better way of doing it. Client-side scripting would be a better choice than having more of server-side processing. We can also have background scripts for large data processing, and you can also run these things during off-peak period for your instance, instead of having these things to run when production instance is much active. Another use case is to use ATF. So the automated test framework allows you to write tests, and you can reuse this test. This way, when your developers make code changes and have new pull requests and changes to the production instance, then you know that your test is able to check overall time it takes for the test to run and do some performance regression in your instance. These are things that if you don't keep an eye on, they can easily increase the time it takes for your system instance to run. And generally, at the end, we need to review and refactor custom code. That is something we can avoid. So it's important that we look at custom codes written by the different development teams, and we see how we can refactor and optimize them for the overall performance of your instance.
All right, well, I know we're running up here on time. I do have one more quick poll, and if you want to go ahead and answer that, and if you have any questions, you can drop those into the Q&A. I do see Ujwal has one here that we'll get to right after the poll here. It looks like a lot of people are feeling more confident about explaining this to upper management. They're motivated to create a maintenance cadence. and on track, but we'll definitely level up with this information. So I'm glad to see a lot more people are motivated to create a maintenance schedule after seeing this. So y'all have given us some good info to deal with. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. We do have a summary slide here that you can grab a screenshot of, but Ishaan or Paseo, do you want to take the
Yeah.
question from usual?
Yeah, so basically when we say audit is like we just it's about auditing what record was changed when, and when we talk about compliance it's like GDPR, like regulatory compliance that based on countries, GDPR, HIP AA, CPS 230 back in Australia, and those sort of things. And security
Yeah,
is managing the security of the data. Right, so
yeah.
data is not exposed to anyone. So, Fitayo, if you want to add anything else, please feel free.
Yeah. So basically, that's it. Different jurisdiction that we operate and different requirements. Also, how you treat personal information and personal data. These things can overall impact maybe your regulatory compliance. So it's important you separate that. Security is about who can access what, who can make changes, what kind of privileges the people have in the system, and then what can they change in the instance accordingly.
Yeah, and I am really sorry. We are right up here on time, so I got to wrap this up. I told you I had experts here. They've got a lot of great information for y'all, and I've posted the link in there a couple of times so you can get to this deck and the recording. I'll have that posted probably, but no later than tomorrow. I always make a post on LinkedIn when these are ready. And also, if you could just please take a few moments after this to fill out the survey. I know everybody wants a survey now, and there's a lot of survey fatigue, but we review these surveys and look at how we're performing. And we also like to hear from you about what other topics you'd like us to include in the Ask the Expert series to help make you more successful on your ServiceNow journey. So I want to thank you all for coming today, and we will see you, I hope, next week at How to Build Your Brand.
All right, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you,
See you
everyone.
soon.
All
Acknowledge.
right, take care.
Right, yeah, bye.
Yeah, maybe acknowledge, right?